Well, good morning and welcome to Focus Today. I'm Steve Johnson, and we have a fascinating interview today regarding listening. Do we really listen or don't we? Our guest today is Dr. John Savage. He's going to be in the area. Good morning. It's good to have you with us. I want to give your accolades, but I want to greet you first of all, because sometimes people forget to do that. So good morning to you.
Good morning to you, Steve.
Now, you're going to be here in the Medford area October 18th, 19th, and 20th. Let me give a little bit of a background so people know why you're here. You're going to be having some listening and caring skills workshops. Let me tell you about Dr. Savage. He's a psychotherapist, lecturer, consultant, author, conflict manager, and a designer of training systems. I think that's something that I think will be fascinating to get into a little bit. He's also the author of a book called Your Spiritual IQ, and listening and caring skills, and also the apathetic and bored church member. That was your first one, right? Back in 1976?
Right, long time ago.
Well, we're probably going to be focusing on the listening and caring skills of all of this, but let me just give the info. Cornerstone Christian Church is on Bartlett Street, and I'm sure that they can go to the website to find out more about all of that. Listening and caring skills. Let me ask you this question first, Dr. Savage. In our society, especially as we have seen the political world, if we can move it into that, where there's just so much talking and interrupting, and it's not really a discourse, it's like monologues. Has listening become a lost art, do you think?
It is becoming one, and part of it is that people are spending less and less time facing one another, communicating one-to-one. It's not that texting and emails don't communicate, but we're aware that from research by Albert Moravian that only 7% of communication deals with language, that 55% deals with body language, and another 30-some% deal with tone. So when you're texting, for example, or when you're doing email, you lose about 70 or more percent of the communication. Actually, it's more like 85% loss, because you don't get the nuances of the nonverbal.
This morning about how much, especially the youth, the texting that goes on, the thousands of texts each month, and the trend isn't going to be changing that way. And I mean, that impacts a whole lot of things in the way that we communicate, how we use language, how sarcasm does or doesn't come across. Let me give you one example I had a long time ago. Before texting, I sent a memo to somebody. It wasn't even an email. And it must have been either the way I wrote it or the way they took it. It was exactly 180 degrees opposite. Right. And so I've seen that happen before, because you don't have all of that interpersonal part. And I'm surprised you said 30% is tone, just even that much. I'm surprised by that. So is this a hopeless situation?
No, not at all. One of the things that we've been doing around the country and world, as a matter of fact, is training hundreds of people on how to pay attention. For example, the workshop that I'm doing is really focused, can be focused in many ways. First of all, it's focused for congregation on how to care and listen to its own members so that people stay embedded and bonded in the life of the church. If there's any one thing that listening does, it allows people to bond to each other, to care for one another. And these skills are different than you would normally find in the culture. So that we teach 11 listening skills. This is a slightly shorter version of the full thing, but it will be very powerful for people to learn these. The skills are usable in every area of your life. They will be used at work. They can be used at home. For example, I've done a number of workshops on teaching parents and teenagers how to listen to each other. And that provides a very interesting scenario, because often that doesn't take place in the home. One of the things that happens, Steve, is that we have a phenomenon in our culture that misuses the word listen, because sometimes a parent will say to a child, now you listen to me. What it doesn't mean listen, it means obey. And consequently, people do not take much time to sit and care or listen deeply to what another person says. For example, one of the skills, the most powerful skill of the training, is a skill that I created many years ago called story listening.
Story listening, okay.
If I told you to tell me 2 or 3 events prior to the age of 10, Steve, I would get to know about you more than you would ever imagine. Because story listening is listening to the unconscious. I have a little phrase that we use a lot in the training called "you cannot not tell your story." And that's because your unconscious is speaking all the time. The issue is, how does it represent itself? Words, tone, body language, metaphors, themes are things that come out, and if you begin to listen to those, you will hear really what's going on deep inside a person.
Do you find that people think that they are communicating in one way and are totally misunderstood by most people? In other words, it's not the people that they're talking to, it's themselves they're communicating incorrectly.
There's 2 sides. We call it the interpersonal gap. What I intend in sending you a message and how you decode it can be very, very different. And this is not only in verbal, it is also in body language. For example, one of our advanced trainers translated all of our material into Egyptian language and went to Egypt to do training in our listening skills. And when he came back, I had a time with him at lunch, and he said, if you ever go to Cairo, there's a behavior, John, that you have that you must change because it will be offensive there. And I said, what's that? And he made this sign with his finger. Okay, we do that and say, okay, right on the ball. That's what it means in the United States.
Right.
In Cairo, that's the back end of a camel.
That's probably a more obvious one, but wow, how impactful.
I mean, it's the equivalent to middle finger in the United States.
Yeah.
And consequently, you think you're sending one kind of message, but in fact, they are receiving it because that's how they decode it. So we work on 2 things. How are you encoding your message to someone, and how are they decoding it? And then you send a message back to me. Now we're doing fine this morning because you're asking questions and I'm commenting back, okay? And what do you find, Steve, when you are working in your field of communication, of how you find people listening to each other?
Well, especially in the media, what I'd have to say is this: sometimes we're under the clock so much that sometimes you have to communicate the urgent without it being necessarily eloquent, if I can use a Mitt Romney term that he's used a few times this past week. So you have to just get the word out to that person, and you have to make that communication because you have limited time, and it probably is misunderstood. It could be come across as possibly even angry, maybe a little bit brusque, and that type of thing. So is that what you're asking in the business aspect of that?
Yeah, because you folks are in the communication business, okay, TV and radio, and but it's rarely dialogical like we are talking right now. And
that's true. Yeah.
And so we're after a number of things in the training event, Steve. One is to be able to reduce the interpersonal gap, that is the misunderstanding in communication, down to as close to 0 as we can get it. Now, you never get that down to really 0, because the way I got wired when I grew up, the way I was taught, You didn't have my teachers. You didn't have my parents. You weren't the youngest of 7 children as I am. You didn't have, you didn't go to my church. You didn't hear my preachers. I am wired differently than you are neurologically. I think differently, okay? No two people are alike. So my wiring also acts as a filter for how I decode my worldview. And if it's different than yours, then we have issues that we need to work on.
Now, and you talked a little bit about generational aspects of this. Elaborate a little bit more on that. Not only do we have people who might misunderstand us who are of the same generation, but it may not be as extreme as what you mentioned in Egypt. But I would imagine between youth and let's say parents and even grandparents, there can be a detach there that is obvious. Is that right? That's
correct. And one of the things that we discovered is that approximately every 10 years, the language of a person shifts. So that what you were doing or thinking, for example, get an 18-year-old to communicate to a 12-year-old, even not like that 6 years, is significant.
The tone of your voice, while we all know that's important, you said that makes up 30% of your communication.
Yes, 37 specifically from the research.
That is a high percentage, and that's just not what you're saying, but how you're saying it.
That's absolutely right. You know how you can turn the meaning of a word by the shift of the tone. Like, yes, dear, you're beautiful. You know how that tone shift is very powerful, and we get really specific with it, Steve. The tone comes from the mask of the face, and it can be very high and nasal, or it can get down low in the throat, and it shifts all over depending on the emotion that is behind it. So we're not only listening to words, we're listening to the emotion that is in back of the words, because that's where you really care. I mean, to hear that and to sense it in the body. For example, your body almost never lies unless you're a congruent liar, okay? We always look at the body first. Trust the body, because the body is communicating what's in the unconscious. Trust the body language. And we ask, I'm going to shift here just for a minute, Steve, because there's something really important in the listening phenomena. It is not only what I'm observing from you, if I'm listening to you. It is what is going on in me at the same time. We call that phenomena counter story. For example, if I'm talking with you and I begin to remember for example, you tell me about a car accident you had, rather than my continue to listen to you about what happened in your car accident, my car accident comes to my consciousness. The one that and then there's a good chance I'll up the ante on you and say, well, if you think you had a really bad car accident, you ought to hear what happened to me. And that behavior will shut you down. It's, for example, if a member of a congregation goes in to visit someone in the hospital, and the person in the hospital is telling them how badly they feel, and the member from the church says, well, you know, I was really sicker than you were last year, that just is not good listening skills. Because you're not staying with the person. So here's the main part. Steve, this is the difficult part of listening, is dealing with your own counter story. It isn't a matter of what you're hearing. It's a matter of what it triggers off. We call it what gets evoked in you. And that becomes two-pronged piece. One, it's your worst enemy, because there's chances you will tell it. Now, if you're in a social party, it's okay, but not as a listener. But here's the good gift of God to us about our counter story. Namely, that if I begin to feel angry as a result of communicating with you, or sad, or frustrated, that's my clue not only about me, but about you. And I can check that out. I won't tell you my story about it, but I will check out to hear what is happening to you, so that I let my it's called listening with your tummy. Let me give you a little metaphoric story. I have been to Australia 19 times to train people over there. I have a wonderful group of people I train. And as a result of one of my trips, I received a book about the history of Australia, and it's a novel, really. And there's a guy by the name of Ike in it. And Ike is asked to train a group of Aborigines boys in how to listen. And he says, boys, I want to give you your first lesson in listening. I want you to listen with your tummy. And one of the little boys says back, is me belly button, me ear. And that's a marvelous metaphor of listen with your inner life, your soul, so to speak, and to pay attention to what is in you, because that is probably being stimulated by the other person. And learn to trust your tummy. Learn to trust the emotion that comes up in you. It's one of the major things we train about in that event. Does that make sense to you?
It does. It looks like this is kind of a dual relationship that one has to have, which in our fast-paced society doesn't always happen that way. Because you don't, from what I'm gathering you're saying is that if in fact whatever's going on in your life, it almost may not matter what I'm telling you right now. It's kind of like Charlie Brown with the parents and the dog, wah, 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 wah. You know, it's just a bunch of noise. So how can I break through that so that you don't misinterpret it because of where you are right now?
You know, you have to learn, but part of the training is how we interpret the other person due to what we are experiencing and our own life experiences. Because otherwise we misread the person. And therefore we treat them as if I knew the truth about them, when in fact this has to be negotiated or worked on. And we work on negotiation skills, and we work on listening at a very deep level to a person. For example, if I listened to you very long and heard your stories of your life, you would not only tell me stories, but all of those stories, almost without exception, those stories are going to be polaric. They're going to be poles between them. That is, for example, this is a subtle one. You walk into the home of a parishioner. You see on the piano 3 pictures, 3 sons.
Okay.
While you're there, you hear stories about 2 of the sons, but you never hear about the other one. It's called the missing polarity in a story. The pain is probably with the other son. One of the things we teach people to do is how do you listen to the pain of a human being? Steve, I want to make sure people understand I am not teaching them how to be therapists. I'm teaching them how to be profound listeners, which is an incredible gift.
Yeah, I think so. Well, you know, and what keeps coming back through my mind is it may be a trite saying, but we were given 2 ears and 1 mouth, and we should use it in that relationship. Do you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
And I guess then the next thing that you'll be talking about, I mean, you're hitting in a whole lot of areas there that I don't know about at this point, like paraphrasing, productive questions. I think I get that one. Neurolinguistics, life commandments, and story listening. I think it sounds pretty fascinating what people will learn at your seminar here. I imagine they can use not only at home, but also at work as well, and whatever social situation they're in.
Yeah, the life commandment, Steve, is just one of the most powerful pieces of the training, namely how to listen to a person's belief system. Namely, how did you get to believe what you now believe about God, Christ, yourself, other people? How did that happen? How did that get installed? I've spent the last 30 years studying how a brain installs a belief system. And a lot of the beliefs that we have are quite dysfunctional. Namely, you believe a lie. Someone told you you're terrible, you're awful, you're ugly, you never do anything right, you're a misfit, I wish to God I never had you, as a parental command. And then you begin to install that into yourself. And the way it gets installed, Steve, is you say it to yourself. If you do not say it to yourself, it probably will not get installed. But it's, I was working with a group of Mennonites in Vancouver, British Columbia, when a woman jumps up out of the back chair in the room and says, I now know why I'm the only healthy member of my family. And I said, how's that? She said, my mother said to me and my two brothers, you're the dumbest, stupidest kids and you'll never amount to anything. And she said, when mother said that to me, I said to myself, you're wrong, I'm smart. So it's not what the other person said, it's what you say to yourself.
Oh, fascinating. Dr. Savage, thanks for being with us. Let me give some information here. He's going to be in town at Cornerstone Christian Church, and you can get the tickets through Living Water Counseling. Let me give you that phone number. It's 840-1924. It'll be October 18th, 19th, and 20th. And we'll have more information on that too on our website, but you can call right now, 840-1924 for the upcoming seminar. Thanks for being with us, Dr. Savage. Appreciate it.
It was a pleasure. Great to be with you.